All right, so I guess we can go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Lunch and Learn with EDII for the Beyond the Binary presentation. Just a little information for the Zoom accessibility. For the closed captioning, you can enable live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom following the instructions right here. And one sec. Sorry, I'm getting over being sick, so I'm trying not to clear my throat on mic with everybody. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. So welcome to Beyond the Binary, Best Practices for Creating a Queer-Friendly Library. I am Hailey, my pronouns are they, them, and I work at the Norman Public Library West with the Pioneer Library System. And then presenting with me today is Casey Lowry, who uses she, they, from East Central University, and Sid Stevenson, who uses they, them, from the Oklahoma City University Chickasaw Nation Law Library. So we will get started. So a little bit of an overview of our presentation. We're going to go over the importance of why pronouns and inclusivity matter, ways that you can be inclusive and create a safe environment for patrons and employees, and the impact that your actions can have and how they can make a difference. So to get started, I have some statistics for you, which some of these statistics can get kind of heavy, so just a warning for that. But these are all from the Trevor Project from 2022. And 73% of LGBTQIA plus youth report that they have experienced discrimination based on their sexual orientation or gender identity at least once in their lifetime. Fewer than 1 in 3 trans and non-binary youth found their home to be gender affirming. And 45% of LGBTQIA plus youth seriously considered suicide in the past year, while those with affirming spaces have much lower rates of attempts. From the Human Rights Campaign, it has found that 92% of LGBT youth say they hear negative messages about being LGBT. The top sources are the school, the internet, and their peers. And then this one I found very shocking and heartbreaking, but there is a 406% increase in online hate directed towards the LGBTQIA plus community in the month after the controversial Florida bill. But then having at least one accepting adult can reduce the risks of a suicide attempt among LGBTQIA plus young people by 40%. And so we find that statistic in particular is really important because you could be that one person, or your library could be that place that is comfortable and welcoming for these young people. So a little bit about why pronouns are important. Excuse me. Using someone's correct pronouns can have a very positive impact on their mental and emotional well-being. And a great way to normalize pronoun sharing is first to share your own. So kind of like I did at the beginning, just say, my name is Hailey, my pronouns are they, them, and then you can go on from there. And that's just, even if you use the pronouns that match with how you present, it's still important to share your own, just to normalize that and make other people feel more comfortable to do the same. And then it can be offensive or harassing to guess at someone's pronouns and refer to them using these pronouns or using those pronouns if that is not how that person wants to be known. So it's okay to make mistakes, which we will say multiple times throughout this presentation, but just keep in mind that it really does make a huge difference to that individual. And so another quick guide, one of the biggest arguments that you will hear is that they is plural. It cannot be used to refer to only one person. So from dictionary.com, they has been in use as a singular pronoun since the 1300s. Among its best known users in history, Chaucer, Shakespeare, and Jane Austen. So if somebody tries to use that argument, dictionary.com has your back. It is grammatically correct. And then I just like this one because we use they, them as singular a lot without even really realizing. So for example, someone will say they, them as a singular pronoun just isn't grammatically correct. Then they will turn around and say, but to each their own. So We use it whether we realize, and it is grammatically correct. So once again, it is grammatically correct. Don't make assumptions based on someone's appearance, but if you do make a mistake, it's okay. Just correct yourself and move on, and just don't dwell on it. Just, oh, I'm sorry, correct yourself and go on. It's okay to ask questions, but be mindful and respectful. It's okay to ask questions because it does show that you are trying to learn, but also no one owes anyone else an explanation of their identity. So if they aren't comfortable being that or trying to explain things or teaching you, that's not their job. And so just be respectful of that as well.
Just a quick note about that. A lot of LGBTQ people have to explain themselves on a regular basis. So sometimes it can be kind of tiring. And so if somebody is just not right in the right headspace to do it in that moment, don't push it. You might want to learn from them and ask them questions, but maybe that's just not the right moment and they don't feel comfortable. So just keep that in mind.
I muted myself, sorry. So this is just another quote that I like, that people get built different. We don't need to figure it out. We just need to respect it. There are so many different types of identities in the world that one person will never understand every single one. And that's fine. You don't have to fully understand all of the intricacies of identity, but just respect what someone else is telling you about them. And then I liked this one. It's as librarians with displays or book talks and all of that stuff, it's really good to be inclusive, which we will talk more on that in a little bit. But 89% of queer youth reported that seeing LGBTQ representation in media made them feel good about being LGBTQ. And so that's just it shows the impact of, even if you throw in book talks with queer books in there or have that on your display, just seeing that representation is going to make a big impact. And a personal aside about the representation is, I think I was about 27 and I was reading a teen book about this girl discovering her queer identity. And I was reading that and I was like, oh, that's me. And so it took me a very long time, but reading that book really made a difference. And I mean, if I hadn't read that book, who knows if I would be doing this presentation right now? Who knows what path I would have been going down? So it's just really important to have those books for the kids because it really can change their life.
And for me, it took me like maybe 10 years before I first got exposed to like non-binary, the idea of being non-binary or genderqueer. Like, I think I just had to learn about it and be aware of it for a while before attaching it to myself.
Yeah. Well, even whenever I started, I'll talk about some of the projects that I did in a minute, but when I started that, I was using she, her pronouns and going along. And then I started in EDII. It was actually Casey, I believe, was the first time I saw someone using she and they, and I was like, whoa, that's cool. Maybe I want to do that. And so I started with that. And then now I found that I'm more comfortable with they and them. So it's just seeing that even just in like OLA Zoom meetings, seeing that representation, it can make a big difference for me as an adult. So for youth, especially coming into all of that, it really is so important. It can make a huge difference. So things that you can do, as I was talking about earlier, you can introduce yourself with your name and pronouns. You can have pronoun buttons and stickers. I know I have a pronoun button that I wear on my lanyard a lot, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. And then you can show your pronouns virtually in your email signature, your account names, like in Zoom, as you can see. I think I see a few of you who have the pronouns in your Zoom names too. And then listed on a website or your social media. I know that At least Instagram has it now specifically where you can put in your pronouns. I don't know about other ones. Most of the time I would just put it in my bio, but I know that Instagram specifically has that now. So just different places like that that you can put your pronouns virtually. And then now I will talk about the pronoun button project that I did when I was working at the Moore Public Library. It started with where I had bought myself a pronoun button to wear on my lanyard, and then I just started thinking, and I was like, what if we did this for all of staff? So we all had a button. So me and another coworker started that project, and we kind of presented at one of our branch meetings, talking about a little kind of like we did at the beginning of this, so just showing the importance of that. And then so we started having that just for staff, but there was such a positive reaction from customers. And so we decided to extend that to where I had, it's the second picture on this slide, of just a sign that says we respect your pronouns. And then we had like smaller versions for where customers could come in and get those. It was specifically in our teen area, but it was visible from other places of the library too. And that had such a huge impact. I was having to refill it a lot. Customers would come up and thank me. I had multiple teens come up and thank me. One of my favorites was this one teen who would come in and like get a bunch of buttons for all of their friends at school and then bring them to school to give to everybody so they would all have their pronoun buttons. And that one just made me so happy that they were just coming in so that everybody could have their buttons. And then it was a good learning opportunity for staff and for patrons. And I made sure that all of our service desks had a small handout of just kind of bullet points of why the project was important. That way, if there was any questions or anything from customers, every staff member would be prepared, because even sometimes someone would be like, well, why are you doing that? And my mind would just go blank in that situation. So having that and making sure that everybody was prepared, but that I am aware of, we got very little negative reaction, but I had so many stories from my coworkers about this person came and told me how much they loved this. It ended up in a Google review, and I was really excited. One of our Google reviews for the Moore Public Library talks about the pronoun buttons, but it really did. People would say that they felt welcome in the library, and that was the most important thing to me about that.
And I just want to tack on to this that Hailey's project of doing this at a public library inspired me to do it also. I work at a university library, and we got some pronoun buttons, and set them out at the circulation desk. And we ordered like 50 of them to start out, and they were gone. We put them out like at the beginning of the fall semester last year, and they were gone like within a few weeks. So a lot of the students really liked having those, and they took those, and we had to keep ordering more. So it's not, it's really applicable to any type of library, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I did want to add, one thing that I did for these buttons was I specifically on the sign for the customers to come and get it was to say, if you don't see yourself represented, let us know and we will make one specifically for you, because there is so many different combinations, or if we had just run out of one and none of us had realized yet. And I was really surprised that we did have multiple people approach us asking for specific buttons, which I wasn't sure. Like I was hoping that they would feel comfortable and welcome doing that, but I didn't know if they really would. So I was very happy to see that they were. And so it really did make them feel safe and comfortable. All right, I believe I will pass it over to Casey now.
This slide is just kind of demonstrating what we've done at ECU. So we've made it standard practice for all library staff to include pronouns in their Zoom name. And we use LibGuides for our website content, and we've made it standard for all of the librarians and staff to include their pronouns in their like little profile box. So that shows up regularly throughout the website. We also have made it standard for us all to include our pronouns in our email signatures. And I just included a couple different ways that you could do that. There's really no one right way to do it. You can do it kind of however you think looks best. And then I also have an example here of what I do on my Twitter. I just put it in the Twitter bio there at the end. Like Hailey said, a lot of social media platforms they've started including pronouns as like a special field of its own in your profile, but some of them aren't there yet. So if that's not there, you can just put that in like the bio field. So I want to talk a little bit about how to make the space of the library a welcoming for patrons to come. So there are places where you can order or like find files that can be printed out for safe space signs. So GLSEN has safe space for all signs. HarperCollins, Pride on Every Page, has some signs that can be printed. So this one that says all are welcome, that's from HarperCollins. I have that hanging up in our office area. You can also, like, I know, like, it's not, if your library has, you know, existing bathrooms, it's not like you can just change them to all be neutral, gender neutral bathrooms. But what you can do is put signs up next to your bathrooms directing people to where there might be a gender neutral bathroom somewhere else. Like if there's a family restroom somewhere else in the building, you can direct people to where that location is at the other bathrooms. There are also, if you're making a sign to put up and you're going to be using images of people, it's just good to include people that look diverse. So that includes gender nonconforming people. And Vice actually has a really nice collection of photos that they allow people to use. So there's a link there. And on the next slide, this is just a zoom in of what that bathroom sign looks like. So this is just a sign at a women's restroom, but it has a list of where else somebody could find a gender neutral restroom if that's what they would prefer. And the link down here just has some more examples of others like restroom signage that you could take ideas from.
And just to jump in, we will be sharing the slides after this, so all of the links and things that we have, you will have access to.
So another thing to be aware of for creating an environment is just to make sure that your displays are also inclusive. And it is really fun to put together Pride Month displays, but queer people do exist all year round, not just in June. So don't forget about them on the other months. It's good, like if you create a display of a certain genre, just, you know, include queer authors when you're putting stuff up, or include books with queer characters in them in your other displays. And then also just remember to be intersectional, and don't, like, if you are making a like queer themed display, don't just include white, abled, and cis people. You know, there are lots of different identities that people can have, more than one marginalized identity that somebody can have. And it's important not to, you know, just sort of go toward like gay white men as like your default for what it means to be queer. There's lots of different ways to be queer, lots of different versions of that.
Right. And then I'll just talk about each of these pictures a little bit. These are all 3 displays that I did at the Moore Library. The big in your face read with pride, I like to call it the pride wall. That was one of my favorite things that I did. And I was really lucky to have the support whenever I was like, hey, can I put a pool noodle rainbow up in the teen area? And they were like, yeah, go ahead. So I had this very blatant, like, you are supported here. And then just some other things, I had done like some different flowers and butterflies and stuff throughout the whole library. So I was like, well, these just happen to be rainbow colored. So I just made another little rainbow with those. And then the last picture is just, we had a 10 to try challenge last fall, and one of them was a staff pick or friend pick. That's what it was. So I just put up a display, and it was mostly, to start, it was just some of my favorite books. But every time I would just do this display, I mean, I only had room for 10 or 12 books. And so I was trying to make sure with whatever theme I was using that not every single book or character on the front cover of that book looked the same, and that I was being very intentional about what books I was putting out for those.
So this quote is just a good sort of touch on intersectionality, because so if somebody is LGBTQ and Black, for example, then they're going to have a lot more, marginalization experiences, or different kinds of marginalization experiences, than an LGBTQ person who's white, or an LGBTQ person who's disabled. So like, someone can be part of multiple marginalized groups, and it's important to keep that in mind, because the more aspects of somebody's identity that makes them marginalized in our society, the harder time they're going to have moving through society. So this slide is going to just have a bunch of examples of how you can alter the language that you use to make it a little bit more inclusive. So this includes the language that you're using when you're speaking, but also if you are creating a sign or instructions on how to do something, or typing out an email. These are just good things to keep in mind. The top one is just to try not to make assumptions. One of the reasons why it's good for cis people to go ahead and just always introduce their pronouns is to normalize the idea that you shouldn't just assume that somebody is cisgendered just because they look like they are. They might not be. Also when you're referring to groups, so like if you're hosting a program, you can say everyone or folks or something like that, instead of ladies and gentlemen or men and women. Or if it's children, you could just say children. You can also, it's also good to just avoid language that assumes traditional gender roles. Oh, somebody in the chat says their teens say ladies and gentle folks. I like that. That's fun. So when you're like promoting a program, don't just, default to story time for kids and moms. Well, what about the dads? What about the people who don't really feel comfortable with mom or dad? Maybe just use parent instead. We have some other examples here. Instead of legislator or representative, you could use Congress, or instead of congressman and congresswoman, you would use legislator or representative. It's just, to be a little bit more gender neutral there. When referring to patrons, you can just say patron or customer, person, individual, instead of that guy over there at the computer. You can say the customer over at computer number 4. And if you're referring to them with a pronoun, just go ahead and use they, unless you already know what their pronouns are. It's just best not to assume. And also, you're going to make mistakes. It happens. I still make mistakes for myself even. it just happens. We're humans, and we're in a society that hasn't completely normalized gender neutral language yet. So be kind to yourself when you make a mistake, but also when somebody corrects you, don't make it a big deal. Just, appreciate that they're helping you learn, and and just correct yourself and move on. In the chat, we have Kristen says, or even story time for both kids and their adults. Oh, I like that. And it's like the adults belong to the kids. And then lots of, oh, and grandparents. Yeah. Grandparents are raising a lot of kids too. So yeah, that's another good thing. We included this slide because we just want to really drive this home that it's okay to mess up, because you will. I mean, it's just inevitable. You will sometimes. I actually, a couple months ago, I was talking to somebody and I referred to myself as a lady. And I don't really consider myself to be a lady. I just use that. I don't really know why. I think it's just because it's the default language. And it's just what I'm used to saying. So I mess up with myself sometimes. And so yeah, just, don't, it's really fine. The key is when you do mess up, to correct yourself. And one thing you can do is, like, on your own, like if you meet somebody who does use like they them pronouns, maybe just when you're thinking about that person, practice referring to them in your mind as they them, and just kind of, keep that in your mind whenever you think about them. And then when you talk about them, it'll be a little easier for that to come out correctly.
And I think we've kind of already touched on it, but one thing, and I've heard stories from other people where someone would make a mistake and then apologize and just be like, I'm so sorry, I'm such a terrible person, I feel so bad that I just did this to you. It's not about the person who made the mistake. So
Right.
don't center yourself when you're apologizing. That's why we're like, just apologize and move on, because you don't need to sit there and just lament how awful you are that you have made this mistake. It's just correct yourself,
And you don't
apologize, keep going.
Yeah, you don't want the person who corrected you to then have to make you feel better.
I'm going to talk a little bit about creating a safe work environment in libraries. This should be one of the top priorities for creating a queer and trans-friendly library. Library and Information Studies is a majority white, heterosexual, and cisgender field. As such, there can be and are many instances of discrimination and prejudice towards practitioners who are from marginalized communities. Creating a safe work environment is absolutely necessary for library workers, whether or not you are at the supervisory level. Making sure that everyone feels welcome, accepted, and encouraged at work is plainly the right thing to do. When transgender and non-binary employees are working in a non-supportive or actively hostile environment, it can have a devastating impact on our lives. Speaking just from experience as a non-binary person, I definitely felt less motivated and was less productive when I worked in environments where colleagues would ask invasive or offensive questions or would constantly misgender me. This can create a lot of pressure for trans and non-binary people to act and present a certain way, and can also cause anxiety, depression, and burnout. Unsafe work environments are also just bad from a business perspective. It can lead to really high turnover, and the hiring process is like pretty expensive, and it can give supervisors or libraries as a whole a bad reputation if they are not a good place to work for marginalized people. There are many ways, however, that library and information studies practitioners can work to make libraries a safer place to work, including how to correct microaggressions from other employees without making yourself the center of attention, advocating for employees, and asking questions to learn, but in a respectful manner. So when you're correcting, colleagues, supervisors, just anyone you work with, always come from a place of kindness and gentleness. It'll just probably have a better likelihood of them being able to take a step back and be like, yeah, okay, I messed up and here's how I'm going to do better going forward. Don't center yourself, like we've said, when correcting someone for microaggression against somebody who isn't you. It can be really frustrating if, like, say someone misgenders me, but then someone else who witnessed it is like, oh, I'm just so upset, I can't believe this happened. And it's like, well, what about me? I'm the one that got misgendered. An example of how to correct a colleague when another colleague is misgendered or dead named could be something along the lines of saying, hey, this person uses she, her, or they, them pronouns immediately after, or taking a moment later on to privately say, hey, I'm not sure if you were aware, I didn't want to call you out when we were in front of the group, but our colleague uses these pronouns. It's also a good idea to check with your trans and non-binary coworkers to see how they would prefer to handle situations where they may be misgendered or dead named by another colleague. A really great example from my own experience at my previous job, a faculty member on a committee I was on kept using she, her pronouns for me, even though I had on my name card, they, them, and it was very visible. Since I was new at this position, I was nervous about bringing it up. And my supervisor, however, took initiative and made a point to ask me privately if I was okay, and to ask permission to tell the faculty member what my pronouns are and to please use the correct pronouns going forward. This made me feel way more welcome in the department. I felt much more encouraged, and I trusted that my coworkers and my supervisor would have my back. And just when you are corrected, just say, oh, you're right, I'm sorry, won't happen again, and move on. Don't, as we've said, don't be like, oh my gosh, I'm just like the worst person in the world, because that just can be alienating and it just kind of makes it about you. And part of creating a better working environment where everyone feels encouraged and like they are in a space where they can learn and grow is getting comfortable making mistakes and being corrected, just kind of getting some thicker skin as far as that goes. And I know from experience, it can feel really embarrassing to mess up or to hurt somebody's feelings. But remember that making mistakes with pronouns or chosen names is not a situation where you need to be comforted, and it happens all the time. Just own your mistake, work to do better, and make sure that the colleague that you misgendered or dead named is okay. And, when you have to have the person that you hurt comfort you, it can make your colleague feel like their feelings and safety in the workplace aren't really a priority. If you are correcting a person and that person is upset or their feelings get really hurt, that can definitely be frustrating, but it isn't an uncommon reaction. It could be due to shame just from messing up, because it is, sometimes it's embarrassing when you mess up and you're in front of people, or just because genuinely they aren't supportive. In that instance, be sure again to respond with kindness and gentleness, but be firm, and don't be afraid to offer resources or just, make sure that your supervisor is looped in. And as I've stressed again, just make sure to check on the feelings and safety of the person who is misgendered or dead named, because that is the first priority, just making sure that they feel safe at work. Being mindful of who you are defending, don't try to be a savior. Like we've said, I'm still on the previous slide, by the way. Don't center yourself in a situation where someone is experiencing a microaggression or just straight up discrimination. It's so important to advocate for your patrons and your colleagues, using person first language. So just kind of some examples to avoid creating a situation where your language may center yourself. Try to avoid using I, me, or my statements like, oh my gosh, I'm so upset that this transphobia happened. I feel horrible. This is terrible for me. Try to use language that centers the person or group that was hurt. For example, it's so awful that you experienced this. What is the best way to support you right now? And then next slide, please. And then asking questions. This is really great. It's a really great way to learn and to make your colleagues feel like you care about them and want them to feel welcome and like they're a valued part of the workplace. However, it's important to remember that you are not entitled to other people's personal information or private information, especially in professional spaces or business spaces. Consent is absolutely important for maintaining professional relationships that are positive with other library employees and with patrons and other members of the community. Also, just don't make unwarranted comments about your colleague's appearance. This can almost always come across as offensive. So just definitely avoid that, because it doesn't have anything to do with work, and it can make non-binary and trans people feel like they can't really express themselves. Next slide, please. Employee training and policies. Pronoun trainings in particular are a really great way for cisgender employees to learn more about transgender and non-binary people, as well as giving them the tools to use more inclusive language in the workplace. For academic libraries, for example, you could put on a pronoun training in collaboration with campus-based diversity, equity, and LGBTQ advocacy organizations. What was that?
Can you repeat what you said, Sid? I think you froze for a second.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. As I was saying, pronoun trainings are a really great way for gender employees to learn more about transgender and non-binary people, as well as giving them the tools to use more inclusive language in the workplace. And this, you don't have to do this alone. There are a lot of resources available for different library types. Academic libraries, you can work with diversity, equity, and inclusion offices on your campus, and public libraries can work with local, state, or national advocacy organizations. For trainings, it's also important to remember that you need to have curriculum led by actual experts or community members. A very easy way to alienate marginalized communities is to have a training or an educational session led by people who just have like no idea what they're talking about and spread basically like misinformation just because they're not well informed. So yeah, that's really important. And then as far as hiring policies go, these really set the tone of the workplace for new employees. For instance, when applying for jobs after finishing my master's degree, the position I ended up accepting, which is where I'm at now, really stood out to me because of how inclusive and welcoming it was. Everyone got my pronouns right immediately. They just saw it in my email and didn't even ask, they just got it. And that was really awesome. And it was clear that they just really valued having a diverse staff and creating a library space that was welcoming to transgender and non-binary people. One important part of the hiring process that people should keep in mind, like if you are a person that runs hiring, is to provide an opportunity for applicants to use their chosen name on applications instead of their dead names. Same with online systems for the hiring process, like when you're getting your email set up or integrated library systems, make sure that your trans and non-binary employees do not have to put their dead name on everything, because that just sucks. And then amend or remove questions about gender that only include male or female as the options. It's just not relevant. Also, male, female, or other is not a sufficient solution to how exclusionary gender questions can be on applications. And it's also just important to make an effort to get pronouns of applicants before interviews, so you go into that already making them feel really welcome and valued. And that's just really easy. You can either do it via email, in person, or over the phone. Just be like, hey, before we start this interview process, what are your pronouns? I want to make sure to get that right, and then share yours. Avoid using gendered terms during interviews or asking like invasive personal questions. Like that's already the law, but just don't do it because people still do it anyways. And just hire trans and non-binary people. Potential hirees seeing people from their community on staff will make them feel way more comfortable about potentially accepting a job offer. For collection development, making those policies more inclusive, just try to update them and your procedures to be inclusive of materials written by and for transgender and non-binary people. Include their stories, their studies, and topics. This goes for all library types. And then patron accounts, ensure it would be a good idea to ensure that patrons have a way to update their profiles with their chosen name so that their dead name isn't on their online profile or their physical library card. And we also want to make sure to ensure that private information of patrons is protected. as many library vendors do sell user data. And then just getting feedback from employees and patrons. This is a great way to discover specific and actionable ways to improve the work environment. Feedback can be received in a variety of ways through surveys, formal one-on-one conversations, focus groups, or even through just casual, like water cooler talk. And if you do, once again, if you do choose to conduct a workplace survey to see how you can make the workplace more inclusive, make sure that it is designed in a way that protects the privacy of respondents so they don't face any potential negative repercussions for their answers. Next slide, please. And then lastly, dress codes. I cannot stress enough, please do not use gendered language in your dress codes. It is very restrictive. It can stifle self-expression and be especially harmful to transgender and non-binary employees. It can also create an atmosphere where library staff do not feel welcome or like they can express themselves in a way that is comfortable for them. An example of a good dress code is my current workplace, where it's just business casual. It gives us a wide variety of options for how to dress, and it allows us to express ourselves. If your dress code does include any gendered language, we recommend modifying the policy to only include gender neutral language. For instance, use the term employees or staff instead of men or women. It's also important to remember that if you do have a dress code, make sure that it serves a legitimate purpose, whether that be for safety or just professional reasons. Got a comment in the chat. Mustang has the best dress code I've ever seen in work. It's called Dress for Your Day. That's it. Dress for what you're doing for that day. I think that's really awesome. And just a great idea, because I've worked in a lot of different library types, and sometimes you're crawling under stuff trying to fix computers and big screens, and sometimes you are in tons and tons of meetings and need to dress a little bit nicer. And lastly, I just want to stress of all of this, when working to make the workplace more inclusive, you need to change your behavior across all areas of life, not just at work, because you just can't separate that. Like if you are not being supportive of trans and non-binary people in your off time, you're not going to be able to be fully accommodating and accepting and encouraging in the workplace. All right, I'm done with that slide.
All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about book challenges, which is definitely a real thing going on everywhere right now. And so some basic things. One is to know your library's collection policy, or if you have a reconsideration policy, be familiar with that and know what steps you need to take. If your library doesn't have one, make one if you can, or get that process started. And OLA is a good resource for that, because there are librarians from all over within that within the organization. So if you need help or support, there is always going to be somebody around that will most likely be willing to help you. And then EDII, which is, most of you probably know, but the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Intellectual Freedom Roundtable. We are here for you. And so I've included the email address for the group here. And we have a lot of different resources on the OLA website, including the Intellectual Freedom Toolkit. And there's also an action plan, and then a short training on that action plan. And this slide all has the links in it, so you will get that afterwards. Excuse me. But the Intellectual Freedom Action Plan is just a really small card that you can kind of like put with your name badge at work, and it's got some good steps of actions you can take in the moment. And so if you are in that and you just go blank like I do sometimes, you can just kind of glance down and see, okay, these are the steps that I need to take. We also have an LGBTQIA+ resources wakelet that has all sorts of different resources linked in that, and it is a living document. So we're always adding things as they come, as well as the banned and challenged books author interview statements. That's another living document wakelet that we have, where it's authors in their own words explaining the books of theirs that are being challenged. And then the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom also has a lot of resources. You can report any challenges to ALA, or you can always, if you're not comfortable doing that, you can talk to us at EDII. One of the things that I like to talk about with the Intellectual Freedom Subcommittee of EDII is we are willing to help you as much or as little as you want. If you want someone to report a challenge on your behalf or help support you in board meetings, we are there. If you just need to vent and talk about something, we are there. We can do it at whatever level you're comfortable with. And then ALA also has the Office of Intellectual Freedom, or no, I'm sorry, Unite Against Banned Books, Book Bans Toolkit. So they have other resources on their website as well. And then, so this is the censorship by the numbers from ALA for last year's, so the 2021 censorship reports. And this just kind of shows all of the most common reasons, or some of the most common reasons that books were challenged. And as you can see, LGBTQIA is really big on here. Sexually explicit in a lot of cases actually means queer. I have noticed in a lot of book challenges, it's actually just another way of saying LGBTQIA books. Same with obscene, and I think there's one about indoctrinating children. These are all very common phrases used in those challenges to queer books. So you can see how many different versions of that are in this. So it's very real that those are some of the most challenged books.
Okay, so we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to breeze through this pretty quickly. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about some tips and ideas on how you can deal with harassment if you see it happen. This could be harassment like between patrons at your library, or it could even potentially be like maybe you notice that one of your coworkers is being harassed by another coworker or something. This little image over here, this little infographic is from Kim Scott's book called Just Work, which I am currently reading. I haven't finished it yet, but it's very good. It has a lot of really useful stories and examples of how to deal with bias, prejudice, and bullying. And the main thing to really keep in mind through all of this, if you ever see something happen, is to do something. Don't just sit there and watch it. Try to remember to be an upstander and not a bystander. One of the best ways to deal with issues with patrons is to refer to the code of conduct for your library. If a patron is harassing somebody else, you can use the code of conduct by saying that, your behavior is disruptive and we don't allow that, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or something like that. Also, it's really important to always be kind. I mean, it is possible to be firm and stand your ground while also being kind. You don't want to, call somebody an idiot. Well, maybe they are being an idiot, but you don't want to say that out loud. They're not going to respond to that. They're probably just going to get defensive. So if you're dealing with someone who's just kind of, you think they're just exhibiting some bias and they're not aware of it, you can use an I statement, like, I am uncomfortable with that language. If you think they probably do mean it, then that would be prejudice and not bias. And what you could do instead of an I statement is state, it is disrespectful to use the wrong pronouns. Like, make a statement of, this is what's happening. And then if you're dealing with someone who's just being really mean and bullying, then actually using a you statement and calling them out can really kind of stop them in their tracks. So something like, you are out of line right now. So I know some of these are much easier to talk about doing than they are to do. It can be really challenging in the moment to stand up to people. But the more we talk about doing this and the more we think about doing it, the easier it will get. And there are some other things to keep in mind. So on the next bullet point, I wanted to mention, so Right to Be is an organization that trains people on how to deal with harassment and prejudice, and they have the 5 Ds, which are to be direct. Like these are just different methods you can use. You can be direct with people. You could distract them with something else to sort of get their mind off of it. Delegating is a really good option sometimes. If you don't feel comfortable confronting someone yourself, maybe you can ask your manager or supervisor to do it. Or if somebody is really being like a pretty harsh bully, you could maybe even say, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you don't leave, I'm going to have to call the police. I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen very often, but it might every once in a while. And delay is more about like, if you do observe someone being harassed and you like sort of see it and you aren't able to do anything about it right then, or you don't get a chance to, even just going to somebody after it's happened and letting them know that, you know, you're there for them can really help still. And always document, you know, if you observe somebody, especially a patron, if you observe a patron like repeatedly, you know, calling people names in the library, you know, document it every time it happens, and then maybe you can get them banned. Because you don't want hateful people in the library making the environment unsafe for other patrons. But one thing to really be mindful of is don't consider yourself other people's savior. Sometimes people don't really need that. So especially when it's a situation like between employees, and especially if it's like a minor case of bias, you might want to consider asking the person, like if somebody gets misgendered, maybe you talk to them afterward and you can ask them if that ever happens again in the future, if you would want them to step in or if they would prefer that not to happen. Just make sure when you do step in, you're doing it to help somebody else. You're not doing it to make yourself look good. So this is an image I found on Instagram a while back. It was designed for instances of racism, but it really does apply to any kind of bias. So these are phrases that you can use even if somebody is talking about, like maybe someone's not directly insulting someone who's there, but someone's using offensive language that you are not comfortable with. You can use phrases like this to sort of stop them and redirect the conversation. And then this is a really good comic. I love this comic. They have a Facebook page called Assigned Male Comics, and just says there's no trend of kids being trans or non-binary. It's simply that more kids have the words to describe who they are and feel safe to come out. So this is becoming a more prevalent topic, and it's because our society is just becoming a little bit more open to these different kinds of identities. And I think it's just going to continue on that track. So it's good to just practice, getting on board with all of this.
All right, and then, so we have time for questions. I'll just kind of go over this a little bit, or we can all chime in a little bit. But just, we've kind of touched on the impact of that all of this stuff can have. And so when others, especially youth, see themselves represented, they're likely to open up more. People will see you as a safe person. And I know for me, pronoun buttons and those things have helped me make connections with teens in my library. One of the first programs that I did at my current branch, I had my pronoun button, and then I have another button that's the non-binary flag. And there were a couple of teams there. One was like, oh, I like your pronoun button. I use they, them. Another one was like, oh, I see you're non-binary. I'm non-binary too. And it was like the first time I'd ever met these people. And now one of those teams, every time they come in, we talk about stuff, mostly BTS, and I love it. And so just those different things, it really makes a huge impact. Patrons will use the library more often if they feel comfortable to be there, and then staff who feel safe will perform better at work, which we also went over.
And I also just want to point out that, like, a lot of times this particular community can be a little bit invisible because it's not always obvious who is queer just by looking at them. So pretty much, I mean, your library has queer patrons, but you may just not know who they are. And if somebody, if somebody starts to feel a little bit uncomfortable in an environment, a lot of times they don't say that. They just stop going to that environment. So it's hard. It's kind of hard for us sometimes as librarians to know, if we do need to change. That's why it's important to reach out and important to just kind of read about others' experiences and talk to people in the communities that are typically marginalized and see how they feel so we can adjust what we're doing. And we have a long list of reading materials and links. So you'll get those when you get the presentation. Does anybody have questions or comments? Miranda noticed that Right to Be, the organization I mentioned that has the 5 Ds, they do offer a lot of trainings, online trainings, and some of them are free. So that's a good website to go look at.
Hailey, I have the same thing on mine.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. That's awesome. Right. And then if you don't have any questions or you're not comfortable asking us right now, that's totally fine. Our email addresses are on this as well. So you can always send us an email. I know that since we have presented this more than once, like, we're happy to talk about it. And we do understand if you're not comfortable asking us certain questions in front of other people, it's absolutely fine. Just send us an email and we're happy to talk to you. Yes, and Casey just sent a slide or the link with the slides in that. Right.
I'll pop a link to the evaluation in the chat as well.
Yes, thank you, Casey.
Do you guys have any tips on making a library more inclusive when you're not allowed to do a lot of these things?
That is really hard, especially with policies. It's like changing the policies is the best way to change the culture, from the systemic point, but maybe you don't have the power to do that. But wearing a pronoun button is something that you can do without permission. That's your choice to do that. And just improving the language that you use with other people is still something that you have control over. So at the very least, you can just control your own behavior and your own presentation toward others.
And it's hard to have like the weight of that on just one person, but it really can make a big difference. And I mean, it might be wishful thinking, but hopefully seeing one person do that, maybe other people will start being more comfortable. I know that I recently went to a department meeting at one of the other locations in my system and kind of did a very brief talk about the pronouns and the impact. And I mean, there were people who were just like, oh, I didn't realize, I always thought since I use she, her, and I just didn't need to have that. And they're like, now I understand the difference that can make. So hopefully just seeing someone doing those things, other people will follow. Like I said, that might be wishful thinking.
Well,
but...
see, at the library, we've changed what we're doing. We've started putting our pronouns on everything. And that has actually started to trickle out across campus at ECU. Even though the library doesn't have control over what happens elsewhere on campus, the fact that we've decided for ourselves to do this has had an impact on other departments.
And one story that I didn't mention earlier, when we just had staff wearing the pronoun buttons, there was one teen who came in and specifically approached and asked one of our staff who had the pronoun button on for help. And so just even if it's hard and that weight is, it's not fair for it to be one person, but even if you are that one person, it can really make a huge difference. And so, and you should still feel good that you are making a difference, even if you may not feel like you are, because big things aren't changing. It can really be very impactful to be that kind of person. Yeah, I agree with Miranda. Over time, that one person can have an impact on colleagues too. So,
and same goes for being an upstander. If you observe somebody being a little bit biased in the way that they talk about things, if you interrupt them and kind of correct them, that can have an impact on other people who might want to be doing that, but they maybe don't feel confident to do it yet.
all right, so we're a little past 1:30, but if anybody else has any other questions, I'm happy to stay on here for a little bit. But thank you all so much for being here at this. Let me see if I don't think I have one more. Oh yeah, just a thank you. Casey shared the evaluation in the chat. And then also if you are watching this, let's see, you should get the CE or the continuing education credit certificate. People watching the recording, they can email this address for that. And then our next Lunch and Learn will be serving refugees and immigrants, and that will be on November 9th. So registration is open for that. And we've got one of these every month through March or April. I can't remember off the top of my head. I should have written that down too. So definitely keep an eye on those if you want to register for any more. Once again, thank you all so much for being here. And like I said, I'll stay on for a couple of minutes if anybody has any other questions that they want to ask. Other than that, you all are free to go.
Thanks, y'all.
I'll definitely be emailing with some questions.
Yes, please do. I'm happy to talk about anything.
Yeah.
It's like trying to do it without getting myself in more trouble.
Yeah, it's challenging. I feel really lucky that I work at a library with a director who's very open to, doing new things and implementing new strategy. I mean, our library strategic plan actually has a section of it about changing our services to be better for underserved populations.
That's great.
But not every library has that.
I have a non-binary child, a 15-year-old myself, plus I'm the teen librarian, and I always tell them you're going to be hard pressed to find a teen that identifies both as cis and straight in my group than you are anything else. But we are not it's not a priority.
Yeah.
And one of our main issues. So but yes, I'm going to pass along the information to my director also about how you guys will help with like challenges and stuff, because I think that's something she'd be interested in.
Yes, absolutely. And I put my Gmail account in the chat. You're welcome to also do that one. That's the one that I try to do most of my OLA stuff with. And I didn't realize that I still have my work email at the end of this, but you can reach me at either one of those. But welcome to reach out, and I'm happy to answer questions or support you, or if you just need to vent, whatever.
That happens. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.